I'm going to turn it over to Laura, our Associate Director, and she's going to talk about the census, which, you know, seems like, oh, what's the big deal? Well, it has a huge impact on everything that we're talking about with regard to our representation in Congress and funds that we have for our communities. So, Laura, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you all see my screen okay? All right. Wonderful. So yeah, like Danielle mentioned, I'm going to be covering the census. Hopefully the census is not new to any of you. I know we've been in census world for all of us, hopefully for several months, and many of us for even longer than that. But because of coronavirus, the census deadlines have been extended and the whole process has been stretched out a bit. So we want to inform you all again about the basics of the census, which I'll go through hopefully fairly quickly. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those if I miss anything. And then, like I said, we'll hear from, or like Danielle said, we'll hear from Tiffany a little later on. So I always like to begin with the fact that I'm not a census expert. I do not work for the Census Bureau. I don't have all the answers, but I am happy to share with you what I know and get you connected to the folks who know more if there are any questions that arise. So if there are questions that you have, you can use the chat box and either send them to everyone or send them to Renee. She's going to get those to me, and I will do my best to answer those throughout or at the end of the presentation. So before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to Kroger. Kroger has generously supported our Kentucky Nonprofits Count Coalition and has really been there with us from the beginning. So we really appreciate that. And I also want to thank Vimark, who has given us marketing support throughout our census efforts. I want to thank iHeartMedia, our media sponsor. They created a series of PSAs for us that broadcasted across the state. And thank you to Passport. They have sponsored our Count Me In Kentucky website, which you all will get a peek of here in a little bit. And then as part of our Kentucky Nonprofits Count initiative, we formed a coalition of 19 nonprofits across the state. And all of these nonprofits have been involved in spearheading census efforts in their areas. I know Rochelle's on the call from Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and we might have others that have joined us as well. So thank you so much to all of our coalition members. And a lot of the pieces that I'll share later on are joint efforts from all of these members. And if there are organizations on here that seem to be in line with your organization's mission or your audience, you might want to give them a follow on social media. It's likely that they are sharing information about the census that you can in turn share with your constituents. So there's a list on our resource page, which Renee will share with you, our resource page link here in a moment. There's a link and a list there, so you can look up all those members and connect with them directly for more census messaging that might fit your audience. So again, our agenda for today, we are going to talk briefly about census basics, why nonprofits matter, and how nonprofits can really get engaged in simple ways in helping Kentucky get a complete count. And then we are lucky to be hearing from Tiffany again, and she will be covering a recent memo from President Trump attempting to exclude undocumented immigrants from the numbers used to divide up seats in Congress. So we'll hear more from Tiffany soon. So first, the basics of the census. The Constitution mandates that a census be taken every 10 years to count all people living in the United States regardless of immigration status, which is why this memo from President Trump is important, and we'll want to learn more about how and whether that might affect the census. What's at stake? Over $675 billion in federal funds are redistributed every year across the United States using census data, so a ton of money is at stake. And then in addition to funding Congressional representation in districts are determined using this data. Businesses use this data to research store locations or needs within various communities. And communities use this in planning things like hospitals, roads, organizations, community services. And then there's so much more. On the Census Bureau's website, they actually have a list of 50 or 100 things that are affected by census data, and it's a non-exhaustive list. You could really go on and on about all that we get from this data. In fact, nonprofits often use census data in things like grant proposals, so this is information that really benefits all of us. So in terms of funding, every person not counted, Kentucky stands to lose $2,021 per year for 10 years. That's according to a study by George Washington University. So over 10 years, that becomes a total of over $20,000 that Kentucky stands to lose before the next census is taken in 2030, and that's for each person not counted. So to put that into context, for an uncounted family of 4, that's a cost of over $80,000 total over 10 years. And then all the while, these families are sending their kids to schools, using public transportation, driving on roads and bridges. And if they've been counted, Kentucky could have received more funds to cover this, which would prevent school overcrowding, help maintain infrastructure, that sort of thing. So the numbers are big and really the effects are huge. In the 2010 census, an estimated 12,500 kids under the age of 5 were not counted, and Kentucky lost out on $12.2 million for these kids every year from 5 programs. The programs included Medicaid, K-CHIP, foster care funding, adoption assistance, and a portion of the federal child care block grant. So children under 5 are just one hard to count population. There are many other populations that are hard to count, and I'll go through those here in a little bit. But basically, these are huge amounts of money at stake, and an undercount has drastic effects on funding for programs that many of us depend on. So in addition to funding, census data are used to determine representation in Congress. Until the 1990 census, Kentucky actually had 7 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and then based on the 1990 census data, we've only had 6 seats representing us. So this is a really clear example of how these counts matter and help us get a voice in Washington. And a little closer to home, it affects us as well. Our legislative districts for the Kentucky General Assembly are also determined by census data. So we know a little about why the census is important. Let's talk about the questionnaire itself. Quick, easy, and safe is one of the taglines that the Census Bureau uses. There are 9 questions that take approximately 10 minutes to complete, and it's safe. So it's the law that your personal information cannot and will not be shared with any agency. So that includes immigration agencies. The census will not ask about your income, your education level, or your social security numbers. And your answers will not affect your benefits or immigration status. So there are a lot of myths and there's a lot of fear surrounding the census out there. So it's really important for us to understand what the census does and does not include so that we can help dispel those myths and comfort anyone who maybe has concerns about taking the census. And then for the first time this year, the 2020 census census has an online response option. The website is listed here. It's my2020census.gov, and that is the website that you'll go to. You'll type in either an identifying number that you got on a postcard or your address, your mailing address, and you will complete your census. If you have a P.O. box, it's a little different. You use your residential address rather than your mailing or your P.O. box. But an important thing to note here is that while we are excited to have an online response option, it's made it much easier and accessible for a lot of us. Households can still complete the census by phone or by mail. So this is especially important, especially if you have constituents that might be in an area that has low access to internet. Parts of Eastern Kentucky have low internet access. The census is still available by phone or by mail. So Do not let a lack of access to internet stop you or anyone else from completing your census. So we want to make sure we share this website and this information widely. So let's take a poll. Have you completed your census? So I'm really hopeful here that we will get a really good response rate. So far, so good. And if you haven't yet, I'm hoping that means you will hop off here and complete your census right after this town hall. It's looking good so far. We're at 100% from those of you who have completed. So that's great. I'll end this in just another moment, but I was curious to see if we were representative of Kentucky's response rate, which I'll get to in a moment. So it looks like we're at 100% of those of you that answered the poll. So thank you for completing your census. And the good news is we are, as a group here at this town hall, have a much better response rate than Kentucky as a whole. Sadly, Kentucky as a whole, this screenshot was taken a few days ago, so I think that number has gone up a few tenths of a percentage point, but we are still right around 65% in Kentucky, which means about 35% of Kentuckians have not yet completed their census. We are a few percentage points ahead of the national average, which is great, but unfortunately the response rate here in Kentucky has slowed. We were really lucky to get a lot of great shout outs by Governor Beshear when he was doing his daily COVID press briefings. He mentioned the census almost every day there for a while, and the numbers were really, really increasing. Sadly, the census shout-outs and the press briefings have ended, so we are not seeing these numbers increase. And I think the other part of that is that a lot of the folks that are hearing the message online and on social media have already completed theirs, right? So we'll touch more on that a little later, but a lot of the folks that are hearing this on social media have completed theirs. So we now need to figure out how to reach folks that aren't on social media to fill in that 35% gap. But I do want to show you, this screenshot, and the website, the census website has the full map that you can filter out based on date, by state, of course, and then even further down in the state, you can filter out by county, city, congressional district. So you can look at the counties that your organization serves, the cities that your organization serves, and see how those response rates are looking. To look for those low response areas. I do have a list. If anyone's curious, feel free to email me after this, and I'm happy to share a list with you of the counties that are at risk of a lowest response. But really, we want to get that entire Kentucky number up as close to 100 as we can. So some important census dates. April 1st has obviously already passed, but that is still an important census date. When you take the census, or when you ask others to take the census, even here in the next month or two, you need to make sure that they know to count everyone living in their home on April 1st. It's important that we do this count sooner rather than later. So the closer we are to April 1st, we tend to get more accurate results, right? It's easier for people to remember who was living with them or who was staying with them on a semi-permanent basis on April 1st. Now that we're several months out, it might be hard or inaccurate to get that data, but that is still the date that we're aiming for. So if a child was born on April 2nd, they're now a few months old, but they're actually not counted in the census. If they were born on March 31st, then they will be counted. Another important date to note is August 11th. So this is when census takers will be knocking on doors of households that haven't yet responded. So this is why we wanted to do this push here at the end of July to get as many responses as we can here in the next few weeks before census takers go to doors. This is important because, one, we know the sooner the better, right? So the sooner we get those responses, the more accurate they'll be. And two, we want to make sure that we keep folks safe, and we want to make sure that we keep folks comfortable. So if we can limit the census takers going to doors, it's going to make many of our friends and family members and neighbors in those areas feel a lot more comfortable, right, without having someone come to their door. But we will talk about this a little more in depth, but know that when census takers do come to doors, they will be following social distancing guidelines, they will be wearing PPE, they will be doing all they can to keep folks safe, but of course, the more we can minimize contact, the better. And then October 31st is not highly publicized, but that is, as of right now, at least the last day for census responses. And then since the census first launched in March, a lot has changed. So I wanted to touch on just a few key messaging points related to the census and COVID-19. So first of all, it's more important than ever to complete the census. Census data is used to determine things like federal disaster relief, hospital funding, Medicare, Medicaid, and more things that help communities in times of disaster and, as we're realizing now, in times of pandemic. So it's important now to plan for whatever future the next 10 years will bring. And this, the second bullet point is a statement from the Census Bureau director. And he basically says it's never been easier to respond on your own, whether online, over the phone, or by mail, all without having to meet a census taker. So again, if folks respond now, it is less likely that a census taker will be knocking on their door in mid-August. And then, like I mentioned, all census takers have been trained on social distancing protocols and will be issued PPE and will follow all local guidelines for their use. So know that when you're speaking with constituents who might have had someone come to the door and maybe they were scared to answer, let them know that the next time they come to the door, because they'll come back really as often as they need to get the answers. Make sure they know that these folks have been trained and will be taking safety precautions to keep themselves and others safe in the process. So earlier we touched on the impact of young children not being counted and that impact on funding. And as I mentioned, there are other populations that are at risk of being undercounted. So these are populations that are hard to locate, hard to count, hard to persuade, or maybe hard to interview. So here's a list. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but just a couple of highlights. Some of those folks that are hard to count: complex households. So these might be households with families living in kinship foster care, or maybe with 2 or more families living under the same roof. People experiencing homelessness or in non-traditional housing. People who have limited English proficiency. And there are ways to respond to the census for non-English speakers. So there are lines that they can call and questionnaires online that are not in English. But getting that information out there is very important and extra challenging. And then on undocumented immigrants or recent immigrants. So we'll touch a little bit more on that later with Tiffany. So why do we need you? Why are nonprofits uniquely positioned to reach these hard to count populations? First of all, location. So nonprofits are often located in communities at risk of being undercounted. Nonprofits traditionally have everyday contact with these communities at risk of being undercounted. Maybe a little more challenging these days, but we still tend to have more contact than other for-profits or businesses might have. Trust. So our constituents tend to trust us. We have relationships that we've built upon for years with the communities that we serve. And we manage cultural sensitivities and help handle any language needs as they arise. Nonprofits are actively out and about, engaged and visible in the community, and driven by social missions. Nonprofits want to ensure that their communities have access to the funds, the representation, and the infrastructure that are affected by the census data. So there's really a vested interest there. And then nonprofits know if there's a lack of public funding due to census data, nonprofits will be left making up for the shortfall by providing more services, because that's what we do. We provide for our communities, and if we see a gap in services, we figure out a way to do it even with limited resources. So it really does benefit us to help get that complete count and make sure we get as much support from the government as possible, which allows us to continue our missions without having to fill in those extra gaps quite as much. So now we're going to launch into some simple steps your nonprofit can take to make a difference. And all these resources can be found on the Census resource page. As I mentioned earlier, the Count Me In Kentucky 2020 Nonprofit Coalition has really been instrumental in helping us gather and create these resources. So a lot of posters and other resources they've developed are available on the website. So on this website, you will see this sticker for download. When we made this, of course, we were not living in a time where everyone was social distancing and staying home. But the artwork is still there, and several of us have used it as our social media profile photos in the past. So you're welcome to download that and use that as you'd like. Some of you are meeting with your constituents in person, even if from afar. So if you have the ability to print these, you are welcome to. We have it set up on an Avery template, so you can print those in-house if you purchase those Avery stickers. So please figure out any way that you can use this and display this artwork and other artwork that's on the website. Hang or share a poster. Again, this is a bit more challenging if your organization is not open to the public, but there are other ways to share, right? So we have a lot of posters available on specific issues and audiences. So things like young children, housing and rent. We have posters related to grandparents raising grandchildren, and some of our posters, thankfully, are available in Spanish as well. So again, these are resources that have been developed by many of the members in our Count Me in Kentucky coalition, and we invite you to share those in person and on your social media or over email if that's more accessible to you at the time. We have a video. I had a screenshot of the video, but I couldn't figure out how to, or I had the video embedded, but I couldn't figure out how to get it to not play automatically when I switch to the slide. So I've instead just given you the link. But we do have a video that's Count Me In Kentucky. It's about 40 seconds, and it can be shared with anyone on social media. We have shared it a lot on our social media over the past several months, and I'm sure we'll be doing it again in the coming months. One thing to note on this video, at the end it does mention complete your census in March 2020. Of course, when we made the video, that was the date we were aiming for, and that was really the release of the census when folks started getting those postcards. I just want to make sure you all know that folks can still complete their census, so if that causes any confusion, be sure to clear that up with your clients. So the census is still available, complete it anytime. So going along with this, we have launched a statewide Kentucky-specific census website, and this is thanks to our sponsor, Passport. This site answers basic questions, it gives date information, it has a sample questionnaire, and a link to my2020census.gov, which is the website where folks can complete their census. While the Census Bureau itself, of course, has a very thorough website, we saw other sites launching, or other states, excuse me, launching state-specific sites, and we thought it would be important for Kentucky to have its own. So a lot of folks are maybe a bit more trusting of things that happen at the state level, and maybe relate more to state-specific information. So we partnered up with Passport, launched a very simple website, but it has a lot of very important information there. So if you'd like to direct folks to a website, this might be a good one. We do have links to the main Census Bureau website as well, so they'll eventually get there, and like I said, they'll eventually get to the questionnaire as well. So I invite you to check that out and share that freely and widely as you'd like. So again, thank you to Passport for making this website possible. And of course, most of us are at home. We're living most of our lives very remotely, as we are right now. And we do a lot on social media. So don't underestimate the power of social media. Post, post, post. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is that you're on. From your organization page, from your personal page, keep sharing. As I mentioned earlier, there is a thought within the Census Bureau and outside that a lot of the folks that are on social media have already heard these messages and, like you, have already completed their census, which is wonderful. But how can we use social media to make sure we're reaching the folks that don't have that internet access or maybe aren't on social media? This is some wording, it's a paraphrased version of some wording that some of our census contacts have shared with us. So if you've already responded to the census, thank you. Now, who are the 3 friends or family members that you can reach out to and ask to respond to the census? So that's just one example of a way that you can handle it to make sure that you're encouraging the people who are on social media to reach out beyond social media so that the message doesn't stop with everyone, with that 65% of folks that have already completed theirs. And another way to support the census on social media is on July 28th, which has been designated a Census Day of Action by a lot of census advocacy groups. We are going to be taking part in a social media thunderclap in our coalition. So this is basically, we have a packet of sample social media posts along with links and hashtags that you can use. So it's super easy, and we just invite as many nonprofits and individuals, of course, as possible to post on July 28th, hopefully getting that word out across social media. So the sample messaging that I shared on the previous slide is on there, and within the packet there's some other directions you can take that messaging as well. So we have some messaging more related to everyone being counted, making sure that people aren't hesitant because of their immigration status, and other directions as well. So you can find that packet on our resource page. If you have any questions or have trouble downloading it, feel free to email me and I'll get that to you. But we really hope you'll join us on July 8th. It'll be a simple and hopefully powerful way to all get the word out about the census at the same time. And I know I opened with the fact that I'm not a census expert, and I certainly do not expect you all to be census experts, but if you can understand some census basics, which you hopefully already did or you will by the time this presentation is over, you will be set up to really help answer questions and dispel myths and point folks in the right direction. So the countmeandky2020.com website, the Census Bureau website, and then making sure they know, of course, that the census can be completed online or on the phone and mail. The census is looking for MQA sites. So these are mobile questionnaire assistance sites where census workers will come with iPads and computers and set up outside in high traffic areas. So they're looking to offer more of these locations anywhere they can, especially in low response areas. So I wanted to get the word out. If you have, or if you know of an outside high traffic area at one of your sites, please reach out and I'm happy to connect you with our census contacts, and they will see if it's a good fit and answer any questions. We have some frequently asked question documents about that as well. So we've been talking to places like food banks, Goodwills, I think have been considering it. Anywhere that you expect high traffic, not necessarily all the time, just at any specific time, the Census Bureau can work with you to get some folks out there. They will, of course, be, as you can see in the picture, decked out in PPE, practicing social distancing and keeping everybody safe and following your guidelines as well as they need to as well. So in the home stretch, just a few more tips. Write an op-ed. So this is not quite as simple and easy as the others, but it's not too bad, and it is very important and can make a really big difference, especially in some of those low responding areas that maybe don't have social media access. So as you write your op-ed, you can share facts about your target audience and target issues and how the census might affect those issues. And be sure to tie those in with your organization's story. So this can really double the impact and the exposure that both the census and your target audience can get. And then don't limit yourself. So if you have media contacts outside of the paper, feel free to use those. Maybe you know someone at the local TV station. This might be a good chance to really benefit both your organization by sharing your story, and then tie it into the greater community by sharing the need for an increased census count. If you want to see some op-ed examples, you can go to our Count Me In Kentucky Coalition website. Our resource page has a link there, and we have many samples that our coalition members have shared. And these touch on various issues, various audiences, and many of them tie back into the organization itself. And then finally, the census is still hiring. So luckily, a lot of the census jobs have been filled, but we have heard from our contacts in Kentucky with the Census Bureau that there are still some openings, and they want to continue getting applicants in to make sure they have all the census takers they need to knock on doors between August and October. So if you know anyone seeking work, you might share this information with them. A few things to note, there are competitive wages, there are flexible hours, so a pretty good work environment, and any SNAP, Medicaid, or TANF benefits that the workers are receiving will not be affected by temporary census work. So don't let that scare off any potential workers. There is a website that is listed on this slide, so check that out for more information. Any other ideas? So we would love to hear if you have ideas. I'm going to take a peek at the chat and see if you have any ideas. We'd love to see them. I'm going to stop my share here so I can peek in and make sure I'm not missing anything. If you have any suggestions, maybe you have shared or advertised the census in your own way, we would love to hear from you even after this. You're welcome to email me and share those. All right, well, we will keep moving. We are going to hear from Tiffany again. So Tiffany is going to hop back on and share with us about the memo that we have mentioned a couple of times. Tiffany, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Laura. And thanks to everyone who has filled out your census already. If you haven't, please do so. It takes 5 minutes. And even if you get a follow-up call, which I did, that took less than 5 minutes. So it's very quick and easy and simple. But just the other day, earlier this week, President Trump issued a memorandum. And so this was kind of a shocker to a lot of us who have been doing the census work for a couple of years now, and kind of came out of the blue. It's a follow-up of what was the census question issue that was happening last year. And so the Trump administration tried to include a citizenship question, and that went to court. I was actually in the Supreme Court whenever they heard oral arguments. We submitted an amicus brief to get that out, and luckily and fortunately, the court ruled that they did not include the citizenship question. And so this memorandum is kind of the administration's Hail Mary. I don't know. We're in the fourth quarter right now, and they're throwing this up and issued a memorandum. I'm reading this right from the presidential memorandum on excluding illegal aliens from the apportionment base following the 2020 census. And so we're very, very unhappy that this happened. And the bottom line is it is being used by the administration to not count and to exclude out undocumented immigrants in the count. And as Laura said at the very beginning, this is a huge issue for apportionment, which matters to Kentucky specifically. You've already lost a seat in the last census. And what this will do is by not counting undocumented immigrants, it will suppress the count in certain states and move around which states have more representation in Congress going forward. And so it really matters to a lot of states. The other huge thing that isn't being talked about, but is directly related to the memorandum, is the funding issue that Laura mentioned. So, you know, the thousands of dollars per person per year for 10 years, that shifts based on how many people are counted. And the bottom line, and this is something that we're stressing, all of the census heroes across the country are stressing, is the way that this is written, it is unconstitutional. Full stop, period, unconstitutional. So that is something that you can hold on to. And that is because under the Constitution, Article 1, I think it's the 6th line of the Constitution, it says that all persons must be counted. They use the word persons, it's very clear. It's not people who were here, you know, as citizens. It is not people who were here based on their status. It is persons. So that's very, very specific. The other thing that's happening in addition to this memo, the memo is pretty short. It's only maybe a page and a half if you actually printed it out. And they're really specific to attaching it to apportionment, but one, the funding issue. And so that the way that they're counting this, it actually affects $1.5 trillion nationwide. So that directly affects the funding that you as nonprofits, frontline nonprofits, get whenever these funding streams happen. So things like block grants and SNAP and Medicaid and, you know, everything's affected by this. So I do know that there are some groups that are already planning some legal action. There has been some Hill strategy because there is some movement within Congress about it. I believe Senator Schatz from Hawaii has put out a statement protecting the census already. And we know that there's some other big champions in Congress that will also step up. But it's being pushed pretty hard. And there is weight to the memo. So it's not, it was supposed to be an executive order. We heard that it would be the weight of an executive order. That got dropped down to memorandum, but there is still some weight to it. The other aspect of it is that we have heard that the White House is withdrawing their request for an extension of the deadlines for reapportionment. So that these are the calendars that Laura put up earlier, kind of these deadlines that are being met. They were pushed back because of COVID, which were necessary. And the Census Bureau has said there is no way that they could get the count done by these, you know, by returning to the original dates or even a shorter time frame. And so by withdrawing these requests of deadlines by Congress, that just suppresses the count more. And every suppression, as Laura said, you know, every single person counts, every single person matters, and every single person results in dollars for your state. So there's also in the stimulus package that, once again, I have not seen since I've been on this call with you, any updates on any new language that has been exposed, but we have heard that the White House is requesting $1 billion to be attached in the COVID package so that they can rush to complete the census faster. And as I just said, the Census Bureau has said that they cannot do it in the time frame that the White House is pushing. And that's just because of COVID, because they have to do these enumerations, follow-up enumerations, meeting all these guidelines, doing it socially distanced, and doing it safely for the public health. So that's where we're at right now. We're 2 days into this memo. I think there will be some movement within some coalitions nationally, and as additionally with Count Me in Kentucky, that we'll probably have to put out some action alerts and keep everyone aware of, because every single person matters. Every single person needs to be counted, and any push to suppress that is detrimental to the nation. So happy to answer any questions on this, or back to the stimulus if you have any other questions on that. But this is very disturbing, and we are making sure that we're staying on top of it so that we can see what we can do about either throwing out the memo, or having Congress kind of step in, or the courts. So it's a three-pronged attack right now.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Yeah, and I think a big takeaway from that is that we just need to continue putting out the messaging that everyone counts, regardless of immigration status, and that information will not be shared. And hopefully we will get a final answer on that soon. So yeah, if you have questions on that, please chat them in. We are to the end of this presentation. If you have other questions about the census, please do chat those, or feel free to email me afterward. It's laura@kynonprofits.org. Again, thank you to our sponsor, Kroger, who sponsored our Kentucky Nonprofits Count Initiative, and the other supporters of our census efforts, Bymark, iHeartMedia, and Passport. And again, thank you to Rochelle and to our other awesome coalition members. We really appreciate having a team of nonprofits doing this work, because it takes all of us. Thanks again, Tiffany, for being on to share. And I will pass it back over to Danielle for final announcements. But if you have any census questions, feel free to chat those in. Thank you all.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Tiffany, for joining us and sharing the, like you said, disturbing but kind of latest news on that.